So, after Gary Lineker made comments comparing the government's migrant plan to Nazi Germany, of all things, the BBC temporarily suspended him, but now he's back and the BBC have now apologised. Darren, what do you think about this?
Well, Jess, I'm reminded of the time that David Cameron, probably the most sensible thing he ever said, but as Prime Minister, he once apparently remarked that too many tweets make a and I won't finish that word, Jess, but you can guess what it is. And I think that's right. That maxim rings true to me because I was watching the BBC today. I do these things so that our viewers don't have to endure such sacrifices themselves. But Jess, I was watching, right, the vast array of Labour MPs and sort of lefty loons line up to clap like adoring seals for Gary Lineker. And if you ask me, it really is quite telling because these are exactly the same political commentators and politicians who will wax lyrical about the need to build more social housing and about how your generation, Jess, are being priced out of the property market. Yet they applaud a man who seems to be suggesting that unless we fling open our borders, wider than a barn door, then we are somehow tantamount to Nazism in the 1930s. It's completely absurd. And on this BBC Politics Live programme earlier today, you look through the array of guests that they had on, right? And one of them was Jake Berry, who is a Conservative MP and former chairman of the Conservative Party. And he made the point that there's no such thing as a refugee from France. And if you ask me, it's a fair point, Jess. It's why France rejects far more refugee applications than we do here in Britain. We are the ultimate soft touch nation. If you get here, chances are, Jess, you can stay here. But the arguments that came back were bogus claims, claiming that, oh, well, you're suggesting that France takes everybody and Britain takes nobody. Well, no, nobody has suggested that at all. We're suggesting that actually, if you're in France, Jess, you're escaping not bombs and bullets, but instead cheeses and baguettes. They're not the product of war, if you ask me. But this is all the kind of nonsense that's come out since Lineker's supposedly brave stance. Stunning and brave, I think is the line. I mean, Jess, if you ask me, this whole saga has actually shown up both the BBC and Gary Lineker, because the audience for Saturday's Match of the Day, that's without Gary and his chums, who all went on strike for the day, well, the audience figure was up 500,000. That's 500,000 more than tune in to normally listen to Jugs and his mates prat on for an entire hour. So it's absurd to me, right, that the Director General of an 100-year-old British institution, I don't speak highly of the BBC often, but this is, let's not forget, currently our state broadcaster. And apparently the Director General was grovelling to an overpriced crisp salesman to come back and present a show that got 500,000 extra viewers without his chuntering on and just playing plain old football. That, to me, Jess, speaks volumes. Ultimately, you cannot, with the BBC's funding model as it is, right, which is to take, 150 odd quid a year from the British people, to turn around and tell them that a policy which, by the way, the majority of British people actually support, latest polling data is actually showing us, you can't turn around to those people that are paying your salary, your enormous £1.35 million, and tell them that a policy that they support is tantamount to 1930s Germany, in which Jews were taken out, either exiled from their own country or put in concentration camps and ultimately murdered. You cannot compare that to ensuring that people do not make the perilous journey across the English Channel, paying thousands of pounds to people traffickers to get to Britain, when we don't have the homes, we don't have the education spaces, we don't have a functioning healthcare system. All of these things suggest that Britain cannot be the breadbasket of the world. Britain cannot be the end destination for absolutely everybody that wants to come here. We just can't do that. It's common sense, right? So all of these things, if the BBC wants to continue its funding model, the way it is, coercive as it is, you can go to prison for non-payment of that licence fee. If it wants to keep that, then impartiality has to be at the bedrock of everything that it does. Otherwise, you alienate half of the country. 14 million people voted Conservative in the last election. 14 million people would quite like border controls, thank you very much. 14 million people actually think that open borders of the kind advocated by Mr. Lineker and other multimillionaires are complete and utter lunacy. You know, it might all be well and good, Jess, for him. I bet he's got a Bupa subscription, private healthcare. He's living in a comfortable home, God knows where, some Tory shire perhaps. And, you know, he's on that salary that is absolutely massive, paid off the backs of working men and women. So I have absolutely no sympathy for him whatsoever. If he wants to continue down this path, waxing lyrical about left-wing talking points, then he better hop off to the BBC, away from the BBC even, or he better join me on a campaign of defunding the BBC, because that's the only way where views like his, blatantly political, blatantly impartial, blatantly partisan, are going to be suitable and appropriate for a broadcaster that like the BBC, right? You cannot have your cake and eat it. That's all we're saying, Jess.